Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Overcoming Graduation. Today will be my second ever international interview, and coming to us all the way from Amsterdam is Floris Van Overveld. So, Floris, thank you for being on the show.
You're welcome.
So,
It's an honor.
Thank you. So, Floris is actually a person who I've never met and never talked to until today. He actually was on a cross-country bike ride that one of my best friends from my childhood did to raise money, and the groups raise money for a variety of different charities. And so Floris and I were just getting to know each other a little bit more, and cycling is one of his greatest passions. And Floris, for the cross-country bike ride, I think Eric told me you were raising money for War Child. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay. And so from what he was telling me, that's a charity dedicated to helping children affected by conflict overseas.
it is. It is. Yeah, spot on. Yeah,
Okay, so
yeah.
we definitely got to get into that. But for the listeners, they know that the stories start out with you coming through graduation and coming out of college. So Floris, have you always lived in Amsterdam?
No. I was born and raised in the south of Holland, near the Belgian frontier, near Antwerp.
Oh, okay.
And then so I came to Amsterdam when I was 18
Mhm.
and never left. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard. I was in Antwerp just a couple months ago, and I mean, I loved Belgium. It's a very underrated country. You don't hear anyone talk about it, but then you go and it's gorgeous. The people are wonderful.
It is.
So I have to get up to Amsterdam at some point. But yeah. So okay. So we're working on a 6-hour time difference or so. So Floris was kind enough to do this interview. So Floris, let's get started. So when you went to university, I'm curious to hear, what did you study and how did you feel when you came out of school? Like, what was your outlook on the world and what was your first step into the real world?
Yeah. I studied chemistry, majoring in medicinal chemistry, molecular pharmacology. And my graduation is kind of a tough story in the way that, like 1 week before my graduation, my father passed away.
Oh my God.
Yeah, not entirely unexpected, but that was really tough in a way that that suddenly came clear many years later when before our marriage.
Mm-hmm.
The pastor, is it the pastor?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, who would do our marriage. He had some conversations with us, and he was specialized in helping students.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, if that happened to you, your father passing away just before your graduation, that must be really tough, because that is a time in your life that you have to find new goals, and when the basis that you have known for all your life falls away, well,
Right.
partly,
Mm-hmm.
that's really tough. And that was, well, he then phrased what I felt years before during my graduation. It's like suddenly you lose a very important anchor in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's tough when you have to decide what to do with the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, most kids are just worried about, oh, what am I going to do? What's my job going to be? What's my future
Yeah.
going to be? And then all of a sudden, you're faced with something that is so much more serious and deeper and profound. And so, Floris, just if you don't mind sharing, what did he pass away from?
Well, that's kind of a sad story. He he was an alcoholic,
Mm-hmm.
so over the years, his body just gave in.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that, man. That's got to be so tough. And especially at that age, and it's one of those things where I've already started to hear some of your story now, and the things that you've been doing over the past couple years, and you've done some incredible things. And I know that the stories I've heard from the people I've been interviewing, it's amazing how everyone who is doing these things that I think are very inspirational, that are incredible, that are different, they've all struggled through something. Everyone has some kind of dramatic challenge, at least one in their lives. So
Yeah.
I'm sure this, it's one of those things where it is so difficult losing a parent. And like I just told you before the call, losing my mom to pancreatic cancer, it's coming up on a year in July, but it still is something that is just so kind of unreal. It still doesn't always settle in. So let me ask, so you started out, you're coming out of graduation, and this horrible thing happens and you lose your father. So what were the feelings you experienced, and then what was your first step after that?
Well, it was a very confusing period, and I was lucky in a way that I got offered a job at the university, not in science, but in how do you say, student affairs?
Student affairs.
Yeah, because I had been active in like the university council and the faculty board, so I knew a lot of people, and I was lucky to be offered a job. So that summer, it just happened before summer, I could have some rest and put my mind on other things, not have to worry about a job after the summer. And from there on, I went looking for what I call a real job. And I ended up in a small company doing research, for which I was trained as a molecular pharmacologist. And I did that for a couple of years, and then
and Floris, just for my own reference, molecular pharmacologist, what does that job actually entail, or what does that research consist of?
It's a broad field, but if you have to summarize it, it's about how molecules affect cells. Okay. So how in every medicine has an active or more, several active molecules that attach to a receptor on a cell and then have a certain effect.
Wow.
And molecular pharmacology studies that on a chemical level.
Okay. And so were you doing...
very detailed.
Yeah, that's... I mean, when you said your major, I was like, oh my God, that is it's incredible. I can only imagine how difficult the schooling was just to begin with. But were you doing research into anything specific at this point, or was it a wide range of things?
Well, my graduation was in the mechanism of the histamine H3 receptor, which is very technical. And the company I worked with, like a year after my graduation, made products for in vitro fertilization laboratoria.
Yeah.
So and I did lots of research on the effect of free radicals during IVF.
Wow, that's amazing stuff. And I just for the listeners, I don't know if I said this at the beginning, but this is Floris's first ever interview in English, and I told him I speak 3 languages, speaking Spanish and Portuguese, but I can guarantee I wouldn't know how to say half of these things in Spanish or Portuguese that he's saying. So this is really, really, honestly, Floris, you speak English incredibly well, dude. So,
okay.
So
it's coming from a small country, so we have to learn other languages.
I wish that was more of an emphasis in the States. I love that in Europe where you meet people and they're like, oh, I don't speak too many languages, only 4 or 5. And you're like, only 4? All right, so you were at that first place and you were doing the pharmacological studies, and then what came next?
Well, a very important moment in my career where I realized that science is very intriguing and wonderful, but not for me, in a way of doing it myself, because it's also about being very, very, very specialized.
Yep.
And well, as they say, knowing everything about nothing. And I'm like more of a generalist. Can you say that way?
Yes, yeah.
So, yeah. And I look back at my high school and I had like 4 languages and 4 science subjects, and I liked that all. So it's like I went back to that, and I went to work with a company as a science journalist.
Okay.
And the company made communities. We're talking about like 1998, so the community still had to be invented.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we made communities for the pharmaceutical and pharmaceutical industry. So I became like a science journalist in a way.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And from there on, I went to work with the company ceased to exist because the business model wasn't viable enough.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an experience I would like everybody to have. Well, I think that the situation in the US is different from the Netherlands, where we have a very strong social security.
Mm-hmm.
So people tend to think their jobs are there for granted, and they're not.
Yeah.
So if you go to your work and an hour later you hear, well, we cease to exist, you're out of a job. That's a good lesson.
And what do you think about it was a good lesson? Like, what was it that really? What did you learn from it when all of a sudden you went from having a job 1 minute to the company totally being gone the next?
Yeah, so that you shouldn't take your job for granted,
mm-hmm.
and always be aware of the fact that it could stop, and that you have to keep some options open.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
Or at least kind of know what your next step could be.
Yes, yeah. It's the planning, but it's also, I think that's a huge message for the listeners, for my audience, because it's one of those things where I've heard it, I've said it, where you're in a job and you're like, this isn't right, I don't like it. So I think the first step, like you said, is just to be grateful for the fact that you have a job, because there's so many people out there that would kill just to have the opportunity to be doing what you're doing. And so there needs to be some gratitude there. But the second step is being grateful for what you have, but then also working towards what you want. So like you said, you realized the actual in-depth scientific studies weren't for you. And so you continue to move and transition into things that fit you better and allowed you to be more of who you were, which was a generalist wanting to explore lots of different things.
Exactly.
So, all right. So you are going through that, the company disappears, and then what came next in your life?
Then came the Dutch Cancer Society,
mm-hmm.
Who were looking for an internet editor.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of a new job at that time, and I learned that trade at the startup company with the communities.
Mm-hmm.
So they were very happy to hire me, and I was very happy to start to work with the Dutch Cancer Society.
Yeah, that's...
Because obviously that's a great place to work.
Right, and it's a great cause and an organization to help spread the awareness. And I was just curious, have you been cycling your whole life, or when did cycling come into your life?
Oh, I was about 12 years old, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so when did you start biking competitively or doing these more kind of intense cycling endurance events?
That must have been around 2000,
mm-hmm.
2001, I think. And then I went for some races, and then I suffered from 2 injured discs.
Ooh.
Dislocated disc. I don't know how do you say it in English, but
that's exactly, yeah. It's like dislocated or a slipped disc. And by the way, if you hear that horn in the background, that's the train that comes by every interview I have. And so I've named that Donna. Donna is the character on my show now. So anytime she comes by, I just say hi, Donna, and direct people to the resources for whoever I'm interviewing. So. And for the listeners, after Donna's done honking her horn, Floris does have his own blog, and it's called overveld.net. That's overvld.net. And it is primarily in Dutch, so if you're looking to learn and practice, that is great. But he also has some articles that he's written in English. So There you go. So Donna was promoting there. So yeah, so you you suffered. So was the injury a result of cycling, or did it come from something different?
Nah, it's a combination of several things. It's in your genes,
Mm-hmm.
and then having an office job doesn't help.
Yep.
And then I did a race in really cold weather and lots of headwind,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't stand straight when I came up the bike.
Mm-hmm.
I was like still in a biking position, and that wouldn't have been that bad, but I was in a preparation for a really important race,
Mm-hmm.
and I kept on doing that preparation, and that was too much.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So while I should have rested, I trained on, and well, that was a big mistake.
And that's I mean, it's got to be so tough. And for the listeners, it's like, as any competitive person will tell you, or any person who is really deeply involved in a sport, it's one of those things where when you love it so much, you're prepping for a big race, you have this drive that you're like, I can get through it. But I've heard some of the best athletes in the world being interviewed and just listened to or read about them, and they all talk about the critical importance of rest. And that's not just for endurance athletes and professional athletes. That is for every person. The criticality of rest is something that can't be stressed enough, whether you're just trying to get in shape, whether you want to be at your best for work, whether you want to be at your optimal mental capacity. You need to give yourself breaks. And it's very easy to get trapped in the mentality of, well, if I just get X, Y, and Z done today, then I'll be happy. But then you always want to do more. So schedule yourself breaks, give yourself a chance to recharge, because it is a trap. It's getting in the accomplishment mentality. There's always going to be more to do on the to-do list, or more workouts you could do, but you need to give your body a chance to recharge if you want to grow and develop and keep yourself healthy. So, Floris, from what Eric told me, apparently doctors said that you might not be able to ever ride again from this injury. Is that right?
That's true. Yeah. Ever ride on what I consider a decent level. Yeah.
Okay. And so I would say, first, what were the initial feelings that ran through you when the doctor said that? But also, what did you do to overcome that and be able to get back on the bike?
The moment the doctor said that was already quite a way into my recovery, because there have been a couple of months during I wasn't able to walk.
Wow.
My back hurt a lot. And then that was all about accepting the pain, accepting that I couldn't do anything anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started recovery, and that took like a couple of years in total.
Mm-hmm.
And during that recovery, there were several, like what I call plateau phases.
Mm-hmm.
Is that so you improve, and then there's no improvement for a couple of weeks.
Right.
And during one of these periods, I went to my doctor, and he said, well, you might have accepted the fact that you never can compete on a bike again.
Wow.
And I was thinking, well, that might be the fact, but that is not something I'm going to accept right now.
Yes.
We'll see you later. Try first, and then we'll see. Yeah.
Thanks, doctor. I'm going to go get on the bike right now.
So I still, to this day, I wonder, maybe he said that on purpose to get me motivated, but I don't know.
Well, either way, it obviously worked, because, I mean, just the stories you were telling me before the call, I think. Well, yeah, let's get into that a little bit. So, well, first off, I mean, I've had very limited experiences in my life. I've been very fortunate where I haven't had really significant injuries to deal with, very, very mild things, but still that can be very humbling, I guess. And so
yes.
I can imagine for you that not being able to walk it must have made you appreciate, like once you came through that recovery, did you not appreciate the ability to walk and run and get on the bike about like 10 times more than you ever had?
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah. So for the listeners, just a point there is you don't need to lose something to appreciate it. And oftentimes, unfortunately, that's what ends up happening, is that people have to lose something, or they wait until they do lose something and then they recognize what an amazing gift it was or always has been. That comes with relationships, that comes with your health, with your physical body. There are a billion different ways to start to appreciate what you have more and understand that your life really is blessed, even if it may not feel like it. Just the fact that you're listening to this podcast, just the fact that you're able to walk, to see, to do all those things are huge, huge miracles. And so keep that in mind every single day. Like Floris said, the doctor told him, no, you'll never do this again. And rather than accept it, he said, I'm going to try. So no matter what it is you want to do in your life, and no matter how down you may feel at times, there are blessings everywhere. Sometimes it just takes a minute to, it takes you taking a minute, slowing down and looking at all the great things around you. So I just wanted to pause on that for a second, Floris. So, all right. So you were coming through, you went through this recovery, doctor said never again, and then you started cycling again. And what was the first big race that came after that point when the doctor said you won't cycle again?
That wasn't a race, but during a holiday in Italy, in the Dolomites, which is...
Oh, they're gorgeous, those mountains.
I think the best place to ride a bike or to hike in the world, well, as far as I know. And we were camping there and riding our bikes just on an easy pace, but there we did the Passo dello Stelvio, which is, well, an infamous climb. Very high, goes up to, well, above 2,000 meters.
Wow.
And 48 switchbacks. And you ride, basically you ride in between glaciers, and it's really humbling. Well, it's humbling and feeling very mighty at the same time, because you do that on your own force.
Yeah.
Your own effort. And I did that mountain, and that was the exact moment that I thought back at the conversation with my doctor, and I said, Jay, you go, mate.
That's awesome. Yeah. And for the listeners, so you said about 2,000 meters, that's roughly 6,500 feet. And no, I didn't do the calculation in my head, I Googled it, but still, that's a tremendous climb. And I mean, and I know what you mean, Floris, about the sensation of pushing yourself or propelling yourself, because we're so used to technology, we're used to, cars and things carrying us and moving us. And when I started doing endurance running, and I haven't done anything to the scale of running across country or going in the Dolomites in Italy, but the sensation of carrying yourself for 10 miles, just running, just being out in nature, you feel more connected, you feel proud of yourself for doing what you do, but you also, I think you pay attention to what's around you so much more, because you're moving at a slower pace than you would be in a car or a train, and you get to really appreciate just kind of the majesty of the things around you, even if it's simple things, but especially in a place like the Dolomites or the Dolomites. I'm not sure how they say it exactly, but it's like, would you say that you really had just more clarity, or that you were more connected with the area around you when you cycle?
Yeah, definitely.
And so
it's the pace, but it's also because of the effort. You get more into, well, it's your limbic system. So it's your reptile brain, they call it. So it's the evolutionary, all the parts of the brain which are directly connected to your senses. While you switch off your ratio, basically. Try to do a calculation while running or biking. It's impossible because that part of your brain is switched off, and the emotional part is way stronger when you do an effort.
Wow.
So every sensation just comes in more unfiltered and direct.
That's really interesting. I've never heard that particular explanation, but what I was going to say is I've had that feeling of being more connected and more aware, and then I think my dad called it out to me and he said, "Well, think about it biologically. You've increased blood flow, you have more oxygen going to your brain, you have endorphins being released, you have more energy and adrenaline pumping through you. So just through that biological level by itself, you're already at a higher state of awareness." But that's really interesting what you said about the way that your brain and what portions of your brains are activated when you're in these extreme endurance or physical challenge type of states. And then when I think about it and I think back to intense football or basketball workouts or intense workouts that I do now, you're exactly right. Like, I'm not sitting there like, all right, 48 times 22, you're just much more in the emotional intensity of you, which I think can be good and bad, because there are times when you're in a good mood and it puts you in a better mood, but there's times where you're in a bad mood, and when you're on a 100-mile bike ride, that's all you have to think about. So the endorphins and stuff do help, but sometimes it can be the mental challenges aren't so much about what your body is physically doing. It's more of just dealing with whatever is going on in your life for that amount of time. Would you agree?
Yeah, true.
So I want to get into what we were talking about prior to the call and the mountain in France that you rode. And could you tell that story again? Because I think that is just phenomenal.
Yeah, it's the Alpe d'Huez, which is in the vicinity of Grenoble in France.
That's actually, that's where my parents met,
Ah.
in Grenoble. Yeah, my mom was studying abroad there, and my dad was a street musician. So they met in Grenoble. Yeah.
Yeah. And, well, Alpe d'Huez is, in a way, it's a boring mountain because it goes up to a ski resort. And usually these aren't the most beautiful climbs, but it's very famous of its stage finishes in the Tour de France, and more than once the Tour de France has been decided there. Lance Armstrong won there twice, I think, one time trial and one stage in a stage race. And it's called, well, we Dutch people tend to call it the Dutch Mountain because in the past more than average Dutch cyclists have won the race there.
Okay.
Yeah. It has been some while now, but up to the 80s we won there quite a few times.
Okay.
And so in the Netherlands this is a very special mountain. And in 2006 there were a bunch of guys thinking we want to do a very challenging ride, and let's do this mountain 6 times in one day. Which means every time you climb it, it's 1,100 meters of altitude difference, which is about, is that 3,000? No, it's more, 30,000 feet.
It's I just Googled it. It's 3,600 feet. So they're doing that 6 times. So they're doing well over 18,000 feet in a day.
Yeah, correct.
Wow.
And they did that for the Dutch Cancer Society. And as we discussed, at that time I worked at the Dutch Cancer Society. And being an experienced cyclist, I said, well, that can't be done. It's simply impossible. You can't climb that mountain 6 times in a day. It's snap. But they did it and raised quite a bit of money for the Dutch Cancer Society. And then in 2007, they accepted relay teams.
Okay.
So you weren't obliged to do it 6 times in a day, which I still considered impossible. But you could do it like 1 time or 2 or more, and as long as your team did it 6 times in a row. And so I organized a Dutch Cancer Society team, and we participated. And beforehand, I thought I can do that mountain like 4 times in a day, knowing my abilities, knowing my shape. That must be possible.
And Floris, how old were you at this point?
To the bull, 34.
Okay. So you were
35, yeah.
You were 34, 35, and you said, okay, based on my fitness, based on my experience, where my body's at, I could do it about 4 times.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I started. The event starts at like 5 a.m., so it's pitch dark, cold. Your whole body is sleeping, and you wake up doing a 12% grade on your bike. And think, why am I doing this? But it's in the same time it's beautiful because you're all with at that time like 150 cyclists, and everybody's quiet, concentrated, and it's the sun comes up in the mountains. It's beautiful. Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. It's a magic moment. Mm-hmm. And I did my first like 3 climbs in a row, and I got this kind of pace, a rhythm. So you just go up, descend, go up again. And the 4th climb started to be really tough. It sounds odd because it's like only the 4th climb, but then you already have almost virtually climbed the Mont Blanc. So it's like crazy, but the 4th climb was really tough. And then after that, I rested for a bit and thought, well, maybe I can do a 5th one. So I did a 5th one, and then I thought, well, this is all about climbing that mountain for 6 times, so I'm going to try for a 6th time. And I succeeded and was really proud because of, wow, you can't do this mountain 6 times in a day, and I just did it. It's impossible, but I did it. And that date was in 2007. People tried to climb it 7 times, so 6 plus 1. Wow. And in the descent, there was this little there was this little voice in my head thinking, well, you've done this mountain for 6 times. That's not a moment you will encounter very quickly again. And you're exhausted, but not that exhausted that you can't do it, well, can't try for a 7th time. And then I met a teammate, and he said, well, you have to try for a 7th time. I said, okay. At the bottom, I had to get a doctor's approval, and she looked into my eyes and said, well, you're mad, but not too mad, so I give you this approval. And I went for the 7th time, and halfway, it was really, really tough. All my energy had gone. It was becoming cold again. But then I realized I'm doing this voluntarily. I'm doing something I like very much, which is cycling on a mountain. And I'm doing this for the Dutch Cancer Society. So I'm doing this for people who don't choose to suffer, who suffer from cancer. And they have to go through all kinds of very, very, very difficult treatments. So my suffering is nothing. It's just nothing. So I pulled myself together. I said, stop whining and do the second half of this mountain. And I did, and it was really incredible because I did that mountain for 7 times. Well, beforehand I said, you can't do this for this mountain in one day 6 times. So, yeah, I did something that wasn't possible. And that day I learned that obstacles are in your head and limitations are in your head. Of course, there is a point that your body can't go on.
Right.
But that point is way beyond anything you think. Anything you think mentally. So most of the limitations we set to ourselves are only mental.
Yep.
And when you have like the inspiration and the goal of the day to overcome these limitations, they just go, and you can do things you never thought were even possible.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's fantastic, man. I love that. And I think it's so critical for people to hear. And what I loved is that you thought it was impossible, but you still tried. Like, that's the really, really key piece there, is that you said, I'm not going to be able to do it, but you know what? I'm just going to go for it. And what I think for listeners, for everybody out there, what you will find so often is when you just try, you're going to surprise yourself. A lot of times you're going to think that's not possible. There's no way, I can't. But when you're willing to just give it a shot and risk, you're not risking anything, because if it ends up not, you're not able to do it, you thought that anyway. Now you can break through those mental barriers, but if you just try, you can say, okay, well, I didn't quite hit 6, but I did better than I thought, or at least I got outside and worked out today, or what a beautiful view. Like, just trying will bring good things into your life, even if you don't achieve that goal right away. So for Floris, just seeing his body's capability, Floris, would you say that changed kind of your life in the way that you viewed challenges and what your body was capable of from that point on?
Oh yes, yes, it changed my life. Yeah, because that year I did prepare well, but not entirely focused. So I thought, if I make a schedule and train really hard, I can do this mountain 8 times. And I did that twice in 2008 and 2009.
Wow. Yeah. So you went from believing that 6 times was impossible to doing 7 your that first try when you still thought it was impossible, then 8 the 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I think, reflecting on it, there is another important lesson, because if something seems impossible, divide it into steps.
Yes.
Because I did one climb at a time. Because when you think about the effort that goes into climbing 6, 7, or 8 times that mountain, it's really not very motivating.
Right.
Like, if you think about one climb, that can be done. And if you have done one climb, you can rest during the downhill and then do it again. And it's also about dividing your effort into small steps.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. That is, and hey man, if you ever have a lesson, feel free to stop me, because I love the lessons. That's part of the biggest part of this podcast. So that's great. And I think that's so true, because when you look at the entirety of any grand challenge, especially when it is defying the limitations you've set in your mind, any time in your life when you see something that you want to do and it's bigger, bolder, scarier than something you've done in the past, all of a sudden, all those excuses in your mind are going to jump out, because, oh my God, I'm going to climb this mountain. I'm going to do that 8 times. That's ridiculous. But like you said, you just focus on one piece at a time, and then you'll slowly get there. And another example is like running a marathon. If you think about running with 26.2 miles, that's really daunting. If you think about run this first mile or take this first step, it's like, well, I can do that, and then it's take another. And I remember asking a buddy's dad of mine when I was little, because when I was little, I thought endurance running was just insane. I was like, how do you run that far? And he said, 1 foot in front of the other. It's so... And that's the thing. In life, I think there are so many things that are simple that we overcomplicate, but simple doesn't make it easy. So, like biking up that hill, it's like, oh, you just bike up the hill. It's like, not easy, but it's simple. You just pedal. You continue pedaling. And I'm actually like on a non-physical challenge, but a mental and a time-related challenge. I'm about to publish my first book. And, it took me weeks or almost months to get this final edit done, and it should have taken me a couple days, and I literally did exactly what you said to psych myself out. I'd be like, oh my God, I have to edit 296 pages. It'll be my 7th time doing this. And with that in my head, it was really easy for me to go, oh, I'll start tomorrow, or when I have more energy. But when I sit down and I go, you know what, I'm going to do 30 minutes and that's it. Then all of a sudden, many times, like you said, I'll go, you know what, I've got more energy, or it's going really well. And then you're proud for doing a little bit. You've taken a step, and oftentimes it turns into a lot more than you already thought. So love that lesson. That is great.
Yeah.
And all right, so now you've done this amazing ride, and you've continued to defy your limitations and what you thought you were capable of. And then you come to have the opportunity to bike across the United States. So can you tell us about that?
Well, that was an old dream. I don't know why, but I think already during my teenage years, I thought I want to bike from coast to coast in the United States once. Mm-hmm. And I always thought, well, that's kind of hard to organize because I have to find somebody that wants to follow me in a camper, and so I have to find the time off to and be patient enough to bear with me during the time. And then I met a teammate from and he said, well, I did that, and it's an organized trip, and there's this organization America by Bicycle, and they take care of everything apart from the biking. But so suddenly my dream came well within reach, and then it was all about saving money and training. And yeah, that was really, really a very special experience.
And just out of curiosity, how much did you have to pay in order to do this?
It's about $6,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's taking care of kind of everything that you need in order. So the camper, the food, the supplies, the accommodations.
Well, apart from the dinner, we had to take care of that ourselves.
Okay.
But for the rest, everything was taken care of. Yeah.
Okay. So, and like we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, that you decided to raise money for War Child. And so can you tell us a bit more about that organization and why you decided to raise money for that group during this ride?
Yeah. Well, the cycling team, which I'm now a member of, has been founded to raise money for War Child. And bike very fast. And War Child is a Dutch-British charity. They're also in Canada, that support children in war-affected areas. So Middle East, Africa, Afghanistan. And their motto is that in the word of a child, there should be no war. And the thought behind that, if children are raised in war, that's their frame of reference.
Wow. Yeah.
So war gets normal.
Right.
So when they don't have anyone that lets them see a different reality and lets them play and be a child again, there's a fairly big chance that they will solve the conflicts with war when they're big.
Right.
So they think if you take the war out of a child and let them be child again, which means going to school, playing, be happy, then there's a fair chance that the next generation won't go to war that fast.
Right. That's amazing. I mean,
It is, yeah.
It's like the idea of just a kid who's raised in a violent household, or where fighting is used, is more likely to fight and to lash out, to attack, to yell. And from what it sounds like to me, it's like this organization is really about allowing kids to have their innocence, to have their childhood, to be able to. That's really beautiful, because I think I've said on this podcast many times that I think we need to approach the world like children more. You know, as adults, we need to have that wonder and that curiosity and that looking for opportunities to just play and enjoy, because we get so damn serious and the life passes by and we're like, man, I wish I'd had more fun. So that's really incredible. And so this organization is kind of giving them, is the money going towards helping them organize programs for school and for play and for all these different things?
Exactly. Yeah.
That is fantastic. That's awesome. So yeah, so that again for the listeners, that's War Child, and in the show notes I'll be putting that link to War Child. So if you're curious to learn more or donate, we can hopefully help that group out, because that sounds incredible. All right, and so through the bike ride, I want to get more into this, because to just sum it up as it was an amazing experience, that's we got to get deeper.
Yeah,
so,
it's kind of underrated.
yeah, it's like, yeah, it was nice, okay, it's and in total, how many miles did you guys bike? Because I know it's not like a straight line across.
No, it's about in miles.
or in kilometers.
3,400 or something like that.
Okay.
It's 5,500 k.
Oh, that's it? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll just go do that for my warm-up run, 5,500 k.
Yeah.
So
yeah, from LA to Boston.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not straight across.
Yeah.
And it was, on average, we had 33 days of biking. So on average, it was about 110 miles a day.
Wow. That's, just incredible. So can you tell me, what were some of the best moments in that ride? What were some of the moments that just, when you think back to the ride, that jump right to the front of your mind, that you think back and you smile and shake your head and go, wow?
Yeah. Well, there are two moments.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is the ride to Tucumcari in Arizona.
And Floris, I'm sorry. How old were you when you did the bike cross country?
40.
Awesome.
I guess. Yeah.
So
40.
For the listeners, because Floris, I've talked about this before, that I hear, so I'm 25 and I hear kids my age go, oh, I don't have the energy or the strength or this or that. Floris did that when he was 40, and in his 30s, he's climbing mountains 8 times on a bike. So your body can do it. It's your mind and your limitations that are holding you back. So keep that in mind next time you say I can't, because your body is capable of a hell of a lot more than you're giving it credit for. So, okay. So when you were in Arizona, what was it about this moment that was just so resoundingly beautiful?
Yeah, we rode from Las Vegas, not the Las Vegas, but another one, to Tucumcari. And I remember that we had done a couple of miles, and there was this signpost saying, Tucumcari, 105 miles. And there was nothing in between. A couple of trailer camps, but nothing.
Wow.
But that nothing was, it was a beautiful day, kind of hot, but it was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So coming from the Netherlands, which is very densely populated and green and with lots of water, riding through the desert is amazing. And it was so beautiful. And especially the realization, well, this is what I trained for. This is my dream. I'm doing it. I'm living my dream. Was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be in the moment that you've been picturing in your head for your whole life. It's kind of just an unbelievable feeling. It's like your mind, I feel like in instances like that, it's hard for your mind to fully process it. You can't really take everything in, so you just kind of focus on being in the moment as much as possible, because the whole experience, it's like a week later and you're thinking about it, you're like, oh my God, I did that.
Yeah.
And so, all right, so you said, so that was the first one. What was the second other amazing moment?
Yeah, that's Niagara Falls. They weren't in the schedule, but I figured that a 30-mile detour would take us there. And I've never been to the Niagara Falls, and I thought, well, if I'm that close and it's only a 30-mile detour, why don't we go there? And my mates, well, we had a group of 23 riders, but that tends to split into smaller groups who have the with people who have the same pace.
Okay.
And I had a group of 4, and they said, "Well, we want to go with you. This sounds nice to us." So that was really cool. And the organization said, "Well, you're on your own, but well, knowing you guys, you won't get into trouble." So we went through Buffalo to the Niagara Falls, and it was really standing there, and well, it's impressive in its own. But then also the realization, I biked to this place from LA, and I've seen all kinds of different kinds of landscapes and worlds. Really, that was amazing. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that too. Like, I remember I went to Niagara Falls when I was little, and I remember just being kind of in awe of the size and the strength, and it was just this amazing piece of nature. But then to add, I biked from LA to get here, that had to be just, I mean, beyond words, kind of amazing. And so what I'd also like to cover a little bit is, what were some of the challenges you faced that you didn't expect? Because I'm guessing you had never done anything like this before in your life, right?
No, that's kind of hard to train for something like that.
Right, yeah. Yeah, boss, I need 30 days off work to go practice.
Yeah. Well, we had the day that will always be engraved in my mind is May 1st to Delhart, Texas. It's a very tiny, boring little town. But we did a little under 100 miles, but we had a severe headwind, and I'm talking about a severe headwind. They barely let us ride. I'm looking at up to 90 miles an hour headwind.
Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah. So that's weather that when I'm in Holland, I wouldn't touch my bike. Well, it's not that it's not dangerous, but it's not fun to ride in.
Right.
But we had to do it. And we did it. I think half of the group, they got on the bus during that day, and I don't blame them for it. But like, I was in the half that finished that day on a bike, but it was really tough, and it was not tough physically, right? It's challenging, but it's also mentally, because well, I'm doing about 20k an hour, which is about like 14 miles an hour. I have to do about 100 miles, so it's going to be a long day.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's another question. How many hours per day were you riding on average? Like, if you were doing like just on average, you're doing 110 miles per day. On a normal or standard day, how many hours were you actually on the bike?
About 6 hours.
Wow. 6 hours a day of nonstop biking. That I mean, maybe short breaks for food here and there, but
breaks. We had like 2-3 breaks each day. Yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where when you hear about headwinds and stuff, so I've never done cycling to the extent that you guys have. I only biked when I was a kid, so I've never done it as a competition or an endurance sport. But I do know from endurance running that, when you're in your car and you feel it's windy out, not a big deal. But all of a sudden, when you get on a steep grade and there's a big gust of wind in your face and you're running into it, it's a whole different ball game. So 90 miles per hour, I can't even fathom that. That's just ridiculous.
It is. It definitely is. Yeah. That day was also about dividing the goal into small pieces.
Yes.
Like, okay, I'm going for the next 10 miles. If we do another 10 miles, we have lunch. Things like that, because it's just crazy. Yeah.
And I think what's really cool about your story is that what's happened throughout this story is that you've continued to progress and take on greater and greater challenges in your life. So, it started with that first ride of saying, all right, I'll do 4, and you did 7. And then you did 8 the next 2 years. And then you've gone on to do other races, and then you biked across country. So for all the listeners, it's not just about breaking your goal or your dreams into bite-sized pieces or things that you can take each day, but also it's gradually increasing and it's moving up, taking steps and growing, because it's very rare that you can go from where you're at to accomplishing a huge goal. Oftentimes it will take a lot of small steps and big milestones to get you closer to the point where you're ready to take on that bigger challenge. So, that's for everything from starting a business to doing an endurance race or whatever. You need to take small steps no matter what it is to get to where you're going. So I love that idea about the chunking and just breaking it up in your head, because you're just giving your brain something very concrete and simple to focus on. It's okay, next 10 miles, and that's it. And then once you've hit that, you reset a goal and you're moving again. So, all right. So for the bike ride, so we've got the best things, we've got the most challenging day. What I'd like to hear about too is the last day, when you arrived in Boston and you touched the water, going all the way from the Pacific, because you guys started with your feet in the water in the Pacific and then put your feet in the water in the Atlantic, right?
True, exactly. Yeah.
So can you tell us about that day, about the feelings, the emotions, but also just the whole scene when you were coming into Boston to complete this 5,500K ride?
Yeah. Well, we didn't finish in Boston itself, but just north of it in a little town called Amesbury. Mm-hmm. But, well, it wasn't disappointing, but it was I was kind of sad that it was over.
Yes, yeah.
Because the day in itself wasn't tough. It was just a 100-mile bike ride, which at that time my body was adapted to that. Mm-hmm. So every day was just another day at the office physically. I enjoyed every day, but it wasn't physically, it wasn't too challenging anymore because my body was all adapted to it.
Right.
And it was so much fun being on the road with 22 other guys, and the camaraderie you have is so intense that that stopped as soon as we hit the Atlantic. So I was kind of sad. Well, this is it. Mm-hmm. Of course, I was also proud, but not proud after I did Alpe d'Huez for 8 times.
Right.
Because that's also, then you go way deeper physically in one day. Mm-hmm. So you're far more tired after the day when we reached the Atlantic.
That's really interesting, because I remember I talked to Eric about it, because I talked to him throughout the whole trip. I was texting him, I was encouraging him. Because it was just, this is when I still lived in Wisconsin, and I'm sitting at my desk and typing away, doing 50 to 100 emails a day, and I remember I would just stop and think, I'm like, right now Eric is probably in mile 55 of 100 miles today, or he's biking up a mountain in Arizona, like a mesa in Arizona, or he's doing these things. And it was just such an inspiring thing for me and everybody I told. And then I said to him, because I think a lot of times we get this idea that once we complete something, then the joy and the accomplishment and all that settles in. But I think so many times in life, it's just a perfect metaphor. It's so much more about enjoying the ride, and it's not about the end. And so
it's about the way, not about the goal.
Exactly. And that's, really what life is about, is finding ways to enjoy each moment, each ride, each mile, the good and the bad, and surround yourself with people that you love, that you connect with, and then spend as much time with them as you can. So he said something similar. He said, you get to the end and you're kind of like, well, now what? For the past 33 days, this has been my whole life. This has been everything I do. So what comes next? And he said there was some sadness there as well, because you're saying goodbye to these people you've connected with. You're not sure when you're going to see them again. But it's interesting how that works, that I think we're kind of conditioned to believe that arriving at a goal will bring the happiness. But, you know, like a lot of people say, like, I'd love to make $1 million. And people think they'd be happy with $1 million. But in reality, I think if a lot of people were just given it, they would be confused. They wouldn't feel any different because they didn't have to grow to work towards it. Whereas if they built something and created it and enjoyed the ride and brought value to the world, then it'd be a whole different experience. So I think it's a really interesting thing to hear about people taking on these massive challenges, and they've continued to just grow and grow in your life. So what I'm curious is, are there any plans for a next challenge? Is there something coming up that you're preparing for, you're considering?
Yep.
Not surprised at all.
Not like a cross-country bike ride, but my team, which is called Goal, with a GAUL, named after a cyclist from Luxembourg. Has what we call the Mont Ventoux Challenge. Mont Ventoux is nothing short of an epic mountain in the south of France, between the Provence and the Alps. And the past couple of years we did like 3 stages through the Alps and then a race up Mont Ventoux. And now we will do the same, but we'll start at the Dutch border. So we do we cross most of France.
Wow.
Then it will take us 8 days, and then we'll have a race up Mont Ventoux. But that won't go that fast anymore after 8 days of climbing.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what I'm preparing for right now.
See, that's amazing. And I just love how you said we're going to cover most of France. It's just the idea of, well, we're going to cross a country, like an entire country to do this. And that's great, man. And I wish you the best on it. I'm sure it won't be any trouble after all the things you've done already. And one more question before we close out, because there's a consistent question I always end my interviews with. But so you said for most of your life, one of your biggest goals was to bike across the United States, ride coast to coast. And now you're working on this next challenge to take on this huge mountain, this amazing new challenge. But is there anything in your mind? Is there any goal that is still like, and how old are you now, Floris?
42.
42. So again, listeners, no excuses. I don't care who, and are you married? Do you have kids? Anything like that?
Married, no kids.
And so, okay.
Well, there were 2 guys of 65 in our group when we did the cross-country ride.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's, again, that's a,
no excuses.
No excuses. And actually, before I ask that question, just out of curiosity, so obviously it's tough to be apart from your wife for a month straight, but what would you say cycling has done for your relationship with your wife?
Well, the thing it's about living your dream. And a couple of years before I did the cross-country ride, my wife, she hiked to Santiago de Compostela in Spain.
Oh, yes.
Which is a very well-known pilgrimage.
I have a friend doing that right now, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. So she was away from home longer than I did, but but it's we both approved because it's about living your dream, and when you live your dream, that enriches your relationship.
Yes, absolutely. And that's I mean, my parents had such, the most beautiful relationship in my mind, and all the good relationships I've seen that I want to emulate. I'm a young single guy, and there's all kinds of things that people tell you about relationships in life, but the best advice I've heard is that when you meet the right person, they will support you in what you want to do, and you will support them. They will push you to be greater, and you'll push them to be greater. and you'll lift each other up when you're down. So it sounds like you've really got that, because you guys, although you love each other and you want to be together, you allow each other to go out and live the life you want, because I think in the long run that makes your relationship stronger. It shows trust. It shows caring and consideration for that person and who they want to be and having the experiences they've wanted. So that's fantastic. That's really great. So the other question I was going to ask just a minute ago was, is there any huge kind of, maybe even seems crazy now, goal that you have that you want to do one day in terms of your cycling, or maybe just any challenge in your life?
Well, I'm thinking about doing a ride which is called Transalp.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that sums up what it is. It's a stage race across the Alps.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also thinking about Ride the Rockies, which is a stage race in the Rocky Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that's on my bucket list as well is doing the West Coast on a bike. So I think from Vancouver to San Francisco or something like that.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I mean, all three of those sound phenomenal, because I love mountains, and just every time I see a mountain, I'm like, I want to climb it. I want to just get up there and look out, because that's one of my favorite things in the world. But also the West Coast of the United States. I mean, the U.S., I think a lot of people in the States make a mistake in thinking that you need to travel outside the country to see beautiful, exciting, exotic things. Like, the U.S. has so much to offer, and just the West Coast in itself, yes. When you do, because I'm sure you will, when you do bike the West Coast, it's like you cross over different types of terrain, different ecological types of systems you're going to be in, all different manners of things, but see all kinds of beauty. I've been on a couple areas on the West Coast. I've heard stories of people doing similar things to that, like driving up the coast, and it's just absolutely phenomenal. So you'll be covering all the mountains, and then you'll get all kinds of beaches. You'll be covered. You'll have everything there. So, all right, Floris, man, this has been awesome. This has been hugely inspiring for me, because there's a lot of things I want to do in my life that I've been either just kind of not taking the initiative on, or I've been maybe whining or just kind of holding myself back. And I'm a guy who loves physical challenges. I'm a guy who loves to embrace challenges and get out and explore and use that energy. And I mean, the past couple of weeks, I'm not sure what it is, but I've just felt off. Sometimes you hit those points in life, but this has been very helpful for me, and I'm sure it will be for so many of the listeners, because what you do and what you've done, I know many people will have said, like you told yourself, that's not possible. But I'm sure, and I hope that some listeners take your story, because I know I will. And I need to, I need to just embrace some of these messages more. But I'm sure people will hear this and go, well, maybe I'll try that one thing that I've been afraid to try, and then introduce themselves to their own power and their own ability. And that's really one of the big messages from this podcast. So I want to thank you for sharing your story, because it's been awesome. And I do have one more question for you. Thank you, man. I really appreciate that. And it's fun. It's just the fact that you're all the way across the ocean, and we're doing this. So I love doing the international ones as well, because I love traveling, exploring, learning about different cultures, meeting people from different places. And what I think is great about doing this as well is that people see that although you live in a totally different part of the world, there are so many things that we share in common as people, of wanting to improve ourselves, to meet our goals, to challenge our limitations. So I think that's a great piece of it as well. So, all right, the last question, the way we always close this out. So since it's called Overcoming Graduation, what I like to ask people is, if you could go back and talk to yourself at graduation now, and especially for you, that was a particularly tough time in having just lost your father. So if you could go back to that time and give yourself advice, what advice would you give to yourself as you were just graduating college, if you could go back now?
Oh, that's a tough question. I think the advice would be seek for that inspiration in yourself, because deep down you know who you want to be. And it's not about people that tell you who you should be, but deep down there's always a realization that you know who you want to be, and listen to that voice.
That's fantastic, man. That's awesome. I think I love that message, and I think too, so often people are afraid to admit what they want, because if they admit it, if they know it, if they acknowledge it, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, why aren't you getting started? It's so much easier to say, oh, I don't really know, I'm not sure, because then there's no obligation, there's no commitment. So for the listeners, building on what Floris said, know what it is, look inside yourself, be honest, and don't be afraid to admit it. Tell it to people that you know will support you, that will help you, share it with people, because like Floris said, he didn't know how the hell he was going to bike across the country. He shared it with the right person. He got introduced to that group. He raised the money, and then boom, look at him now. He's going to be biking across every mountain range in the world and across the West Coast. So we're going to be reading articles about you in a couple of years, Floris, where it's like, well, he's going to be biking across the ocean on like a paddle boat with pedals and So Floris, man, thank you. So actually, no, let me say, dankjewel for the interview. And alsjeblieft, that's what it was. Alsjeblieft. I was trying to remember. So how would I say, I love language. How would I say thank you for the interview in Dutch?
Dankjewel voor het interview.
Dankjewel voor het interview?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, cool.
Right. Yeah. You have a knack for languages.
I love them, man. And what languages do you speak? You said 4.
Did I? Well, Dutch, obviously. English, German, French, and a little bit of Spanish.
Wow, man. Yeah. So, like we talked about before, like I know Portuguese. I'll see if I can help you out there, but. So for now, we'll close out the interview. So I just want to thank you again. So for the listeners, I'll be putting all of the show notes, the links to things talking about War Child. And what was the name of the organization that you biked across the U.S. with?
America by Bicycle.
America by Bicycle. So guys, so please go to overcominggraduation.com to check out and learn more about War Child. Donate if you can, America by Bicycle, to learn more about their organization. Put up some pictures, and hopefully we can get some good ones of Floris dominating these amazing mountains. If you have any questions and any comments, any recommendations for interviews, and you'd like to reach out, you can contact me at brian@overcominggraduation.com. And please go to overcominggraduation.com and subscribe to the newsletter. There's going to be emails coming out telling you about the latest updates, events, and all kinds of things for the website and the podcast soon. So, Floris, thank you again, man. And stick around for a minute after we're done, because I want to close out. But I'd just like to thank you, and we'll be ending the recording now.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, man.
My pleasure.
All right.